Lily. I'm a big fan. I'm a little geeking out a little bit, so thank you for
Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I
Big
could tell
first cow
you're,
fan.
oh, good. Thank you. I
Yeah.
could tell you're one of my people right away with that little wiggle.
Yeah, I always say I've been a very swishy child, grown into a swishy adult, so
Swishy. I love it.
swishy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um I've seen the film twice.
Yeah.
The magnitude of this has has not lost an inch or an ounce from my brain. Um and I just think it's just a wonderful film, and you're wonderful in it. So I'm already starting very energetically there. Kill. I guess my first question that I had for you is I was really drawn into Mollie's stillness, her watchfulness. I think in the first time that we see Mollie and Ernest in the car together, I like seeing how it looks like Molly is looking around at all
Hmm.
times. And then it sort of reminded me about how when you get into the car and the guys are running around with that race, the camera sort of pans down a little bit when Leo sits in the car and Molly is plugging her ears. And I guess I wanted to know, plugging her ears, is that something that she feels like she needs to do a lot while all these new people are coming in? Um, I'm just very interested in how Molly takes in and accepts her surroundings.
You're very sharp. I work a lot in gesture,
Mm-hmm.
so that was an early plant.
Mm,
But also really wanting to establish what the heart of the chemistry of these two characters I feel would have been in the real world is exactly that. They move at two different paces.
mm-hmm. Mm,
The old trope of opposites attracting, but just this balance and like, yeah, the sense that he's very into what's going on and she just wants to go home. You
mm-hmm.
know, she'll sit through the storm and let it blow over and accept this rainstorm as being a powerful thing, you know, its own sort of entity when, you know,
Mm-hmm.
he quips like, well, it'll be good for the crops, you know. It's this it establishes Molly as being, as you know, the book drew her as a lot of people who talk about women like her, very self-possessed, very
Mm,
sharp, but very few words. Hale, when he's kind of priming Ernest for being in Osage country around Osage people, you know, don't fill
mhm,
the space with chatter. It's like they
mhm,
call it blackbird talk, small talk, is
mhm.
or just because they're not saying much, don't think they don't know everything about
Right.
everything. So all of these clues to her and those little gestures, building the world, which is you know, a very interesting dualistic one for Molly already. So I think one of the strengths and one of the places that Ernest was able to hide within her worldview and her periphery came from her sense of herself as an Osage woman.
Mhm,
Um, One of our big
mm.
references was William Wyler's The Heiress and Olivia de
Oh,
Havilland's relationship to Montgomery Clift in it. And one thing I perceived in watching it was I really want to emulate this absolutely, and I understand why this is a reference Marty wants to use.
mm,
Flipping it on its head and doing it as a native woman. Olivia de Havilland is so much in that film under her father's boot. She's raised in this like capitalistic, highly patriarchal, oppressive society where she's told that basically she's plain, she's unwettable, she's
mhm,
worthless. Her sense of self from the beginning is so dwindled down that you understand how she could fall for somebody like Montgomery Clift.
mm,
Molly is an Osage woman coming from a matrilocal society where women own everything. So, what she would have been searching for in kind of a mutually beneficial relationship is, you know, this simple, good-looking white man that she can appoint as her guardian, so she can just have
mhm,
the checks come from within her own
mm.
house. Um, so yeah, Like one of the blind spots that Ernest hid in her view, I believe, was her sense of herself and her sense of him. He's not capable of it. He's a little too simple.
Mm.
He's this one's easy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Mm.
and then the whole plugging of the ears thing and the whole just disconnecting from the noise around her and then shrugging it off.
Mhm.
I mean, that it's in the book when Mollie did know what had happened after the trial, after Ernest was in prison. Anytime anybody brought him up, anytime anybody mentioned his name, she would just do that. She would shake him off and just not let the thought in. Uh,
Mm.
and, Marty and I talked about that in terms of her Catholicism as well.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
Relationship with doubt, relationship with grief, relationship to a marriage. But yeah, anyways, Molly
Yeah.
definitely was a character that was crafted in the small gestures. So you definitely picked up on an early reference.
First of all, I love me some Olivia de Havilland, and I remember the first time I saw the stage version of The Heiress, and I was just like, ah, it's just so,
Right?
it's just, oh, that's a great, oh, that's a
There's almost some
wonderful,
certain women references in there too.
mm-hmm. Um, I guess I wanted to know, oh goodness, a scene that it's probably one of my favorite scenes, if not the favorite scene that I have of this year that I love that people keep talking about, is the conversation when all four sisters are sitting on the blanket and they're all looking at
Mhm.
Ernest. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Jacqueline West and Julie O'Keefe about the costuming of that scene, and I just it's a scene that I think really sticks with people because it's one of the few times that all four of you are together. You are the banter is so light. It's so unbelievably um sound cliche, but it's so sisterly, but it's just so there's a real beauty in I don't know, the smiles, the way you're laying there, the way how all the costuming of all four of you looks different. Like
Mhm.
three, you're not wearing a hat, the other three are wearing a hat.
Right.
Stuff like that. I was just curious about sort of living in that moment because it is one of I'll say lightest moments of the film, but it's a real example of the beauty of sisterhood between these four people. And I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we really, I feel the four of us got to know each other because that was the scene we all had together and kind of
Mm-hmm.
got to know each other's characters in working that scene. And we actually had the gift of being able to sit down and rewrite it together. So the dialogue in that scene is shaped around the original.
Okay.
There were so many discoveries made during the process, and brilliantly, a lot of those came from working with Osage language revitalizationists, language consultants. And the way that the scenes had been written in English, a lot of times the concepts didn't translate into Osage.
Mm.
Some of the teachers were having a really hard time being like, there's no word for that. There's no way of saying that. So it's the whole scene was rewritten to kind of accommodate and make space for a trickster story that one of my language teachers had given me during my lessons. And immediately I saw an analogy that I could cling to as Molly in her understanding of Ernest. And it's that whole thing of Shomikasi, coyote.
Mm-hmm.
Because coyote, of course, there's the animal element, but Coyote is a trickster figure in Osage oral tradition. And with
Right.
permission of all of our consultants, like there were so many departments and so many Osage consultants that every choice had to be run through.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, the consensus was that this was an appropriate analogy for use. But because Molly identified Ernest as this trickster figure, as Shomikasi, it changed the way that whole scene was, and it all kind of hinged on a line in the original.
Mm,
Mollie says something about Ernest's devil blue eyes. And I know
mm,
it was trying to convey this sort of like, oh, there's some element about him that's a little dangerous or whatever. That was all
mm,
accomplished with calling him Coyote. It's
mm.
like this kind of dualistic, got your number trickster figure
Wow.
thing. That was a little bit of a
Yeah.
sexy dynamic. And that simply came from my Osage teacher being like, we don't know how to translate devil blue eyes. So
Mm,
then the four of us as actresses revisited that scene that was originally a lot more paranoid, not quite as light, not quite as
okay.
sisterly in that way. And that's one thing, particularly Janae and I, who plays Rita, talked about a lot is there's when Janae and I are together, we're just laughing the whole time. When Indian people get together, we're
Hmm.
laughing the whole time.
Yeah.
We enjoy each other's company. We're a very fun loving people culturally. But history and film and old documents has cast us in this very stoic, like in our lane light. But that's all contextual. These old tintypes, you had to sit still. You had to be expressionless because you're sitting there for like 5 minutes while this thing is
Mhm.
developing. When you're around outsiders and you're being guarded about things in your community, you're going to be a little bit, so any anthropological like accounts of like Indian people being very reserved and stoic, it's like, well, maybe around you, but it was a real opportunity that we saw to show what Indian women are actually like with each other.
Yeah.
It's like we're gossiping about these boys. So having this coyote analogy and wanting to fold it in, we all sat down and we'd all been taking Osage language. We'd all been hearing stories from our Osage consultants, and we knew our characters. So
Hmm.
we came up with this clever little idea of since, one line that remained is like, he looks like a snake. And we went from
Yeah.
there. That's when it's corrected. No, coyote. No, possum. We're like, okay, what does Jason Isbell look like? Like we pulled up Jason's picture and decided that he was going to be. And then later, Jason let us all know about his wild boar thing. I don't know. He had a whole meme.
Yeah.
It escapes me, but I think it may have been a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think that scene just totally just draws you in, and it
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. It's more accurate representation of Indian,
mm,
I think, than
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad even just seeing when people post articles and stuff, that's one of the first images that's always up there, and it's just I stare at that picture a
thank you.
lot.
It's beautiful.
Um I wanted to ask about Molly giving Ernest the hat just because I wonder I love trying to dig into like stuff we don't see on screen. So I was just wondering, I was like, how long did Molly take to shop for that hat? Or like how I wonder how is was I just wanted to know maybe like if that was a big decision to her to find the right thing. And I love how it's seen continuously throughout the film. Like later they add the band around the top of it.
Right.
But
He's got the
I just
Osage finger weaving.
yeah, yeah, I was just curious if how much thought you may have put into something that some people might think is so simple.
Yeah, I actually made Molly a little bit of a oh, what's the right word? A little bit of a trickster herself, I guess, in that. It's just like it's completely my own secret.
Hmm.
There's a, you know, you see Ernest's evolution with his costume and how he's like got these tattered edges when he's a cabbie. He's got his little cabbie hat with his
Hmm.
little parted hair and the like sides. I think Molly definitely it was a way of being like, I'm gonna style you the way I see you, and like my own little, I guess, shitty secret and all of that as Molly is like, you know, I didn't like Matt Smith, but I liked the hat that he wore. So kind of
I even feel like the hat is even sort of like, all right, if I'm gonna be seen with you at all times, you're at least gonna have like something nice
Exactly.
on your head. So
Exactly.
please.
So I did have a whole story in my mind about Molly going in and shopping for this hat. She looked for the exact one that Matt Smith used to wear because the thing she liked about him best was his hat. So
Ah,
kind of like that. It's like, oh, if only this hat on this man, but I'll just buy it. And she doesn't even give him the option. She just takes his cabbie hat off and hands it to him.
yeah, I love that. Oh my
But
goodness.
it's also, gifting in Indian culture. It's like it's a big thing. Usually,
Hmm.
a lot of times, if we're giving each other something, you have to check. It's like, is this a gift or am I entering into some kind of transaction I'm unaware of? What did you hide in this hat band?
You're like, before I take it,
Exactly. Tell me the
yes,
context that you're giving it to.
sure.
Yeah, Molly
Um,
did a little bit of it. She was setting her own little spell there.
I love that. Um, since we did talk about stillness at the beginning, I keep thinking of the ending where Molly confronts him at the very end, and I was speaking with somebody else who writes for our site about how a really great scene, the scene where he's in your house and Molly tells Ernest, like, it's raining, we need
Mhm.
to just be still and listen, and like you shush him. But then for some reason I keep thinking about how that is a really interesting bookend to the final scene that they have together. And Molly is the person who is asking a question and expecting an answer,
Right.
and she's the one who comes into the room and comes out of the room. Um, I was just wondering, I don't want to say like from beginning to end, but I mean, for some reason, I just keep thinking of those two scenes
Hmm.
bookended to one another, and I was wondering maybe if you can tell me a little thought of that, or
Oh
yeah.
yeah, very much. It's there's a couple of traditions, a couple of oral traditions, storytelling traditions, I think, crafting that bookend. You've got the heavily Catholic influence, Catholic
Hmm.
influence that Marty brought in. Like the shot leading into it, it almost looks like the Last Supper, the way we're sitting next to each other.
Hmm.
Um, you have also, that whole scene sitting with the rain was a gift from one of our, not officially a consultant, but a very solid friend and advocate, friend of the film and advocate for his people, Wilson Pipestem. He shared a story of his grandmother Rose. That was what she used to do when a storm would blow through. She would wear her
Hmm.
blanket because wearing a blanket always ups a moment. um,
Hmm.
she would sit there with her hands upturned and just listen to the storm, receive whatever was coming with it.
Hmm.
Um, and then the end, having that final scene, there's an element of a confessional to it. Um, there's that calling back, when it's the first time that Ernest confirms in the first scene that, like, oh, you called me a coyote.
Hmm.
Echo, that's right, I did. So she calls him out for it first. She's like, I got your number first, and that kind of like little more context. Blackfoot, my tribe, we have a trickster figure too, and a lot of the stories are very similar to Shomikasi stories, these coyote stories from Osage.
Hmm.
My understanding of tricksters is kind of rooted in our word for tricksters. Our word for our trickster is also the root word that we use for white man. There's
Hmm.
this dualistic friend foe, but ultimately kind of self serving nature that
Hmm.
these tricksters have. It's also a word that we use for friend. Um,
Okay.
but an understanding, and Molly really pegging Ernest early for being this opportunistic, hedonistic, pleasure seeking. And he calls himself out in that too. It's like
Hmm.
he owns who he is, and she likes that because that's manageable. That's
Hmm.
coyote stories, trickster stories are very fun when you're young. They're comedic. They're also cautionary tales.
Hmm.
So bookending it at the end, she calls him back out again for being that trickster, because that's that dual nature. That's the
Yeah.
nature of the trickster that teaches you these cautionary tales. When you're young, it's entertaining. When you grow up, you realize that was a real impactful thing that you learned.
Hmm.
Um, and then Yeah, again, in a blanket. One tiny gesture that I chose to book in that we're sitting in the same positions that we are in that table.
Mhm.
And it came a little bit from Margie Burkhart when I first met her. The Mollie has Ernest sitting squared and she's sitting squared to the table. So she's
Okay.
keeping Ernest in the side eye, this kind of assessing side eye. In the very end, right before I sit down, it's a small gesture on film, but it was a very, very chosen one. She turns her chair and faces him full on.
Mhm.
So that was the subtle shift there was she was figuring him out in the first part. She has him figured out by the end. And in both of those moments, he's the coyote. He's this trickster figure. And in both of those moments, he's given a chance to confess himself. In the first scene, he does. He's very honest about who he is, which appeals to her. And in the
Mhm.
last one, he's not. And what's unfortunate is, well, all of it's unfortunate. He really couldn't answer that, but Tom White was in the room. It was a
Mhm.
chance to confess to Mollie, but also just the grand, Catholic confession of all of your sins to really absolve your soul. But
Yeah.
she also had him. So yeah, that was the dual nature of Mollie too,
Yeah.
of her love for him. Um, yeah.
Yeah. The second time I saw it, I saw the film at like a very early morning show, and it was actually pretty full. And I knew that scene was coming, and uh, the audience was so with the movie every single step of the way. And when he can't answer her, there was this like older guy like sitting a couple rows behind me, and when he couldn't answer her, I just heard him go like that, and it was just
Oh,
sort of like, and I knew that interaction was happening, and my brain is that weird thing where it's just I knew what was going to happen, but I was like, it's going to be different. He can you please show her the respect of just answering her question, and he can't do it, and it's my God. Um, well, I just have to say one last thing before I let you go. There's a real I'm sorry, I just keep talking about stillness and watchfulness, but there's I think there's a real beauty in that. And I don't think that we um appreciate that enough. I think that we are so used to like picking up on bigness and things and I don't know, there's a lot of real subtle beauty in here that you give to us and that Leo gives to us and all the women who play your sisters and your mother give to us. It's a very generous thing that the entire cast gives to us as an audience. And I just want to say that I appreciate that very, very much. And it's something where I want to go back to it over and over again because I want to look at those little moments. And even if I don't have the answer for those little moments, I want to like witness them. So
thank
that's
you
all. Sure. Um,
so much.
well,
It's the bulk of my craft.
yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I think you're magnificent in it. I think the movie is magnificent, and I just thank you for your generosity and yeah, I just
Thank
guess
you,
you for
Joey.
yeah,
Good. Thank you for everything that you caught. I really loved getting to answer some new
yeah,
questions and
yeah,
hear some
wonderful.
observations.
Mhm. Well, have a good rest of your day. Good luck to you this season, and we'll see you
Thank
soon.
you.